thought is how we hack reality. Only that's not exactly true. We would be better off to say that rather than being a hack, thought is more of a cheat. And the reason we can say that, or we should say that thought is a cheat, is because it's not necessarily legitimate. If I'm hacking something, I'm getting something out of it. Something's hidden from me, or something is blocked off, and I penetrate the defenses and break into whatever it is and obtain some information, or obtain some result that I want. But the thing with thought is that ultimately thought doesn't tell us anything about reality at all. And the reason thought doesn't tell us anything about reality at all is because it always builds off its own assumptions. So it makes an assumption, then it makes a load of assertions about reality on the basis of this assumption, whilst ignoring that the assumption is an assumption. And that's how it gets to say things about reality. But that is a cheat. Obviously, it's a cheat. There's one little part in that process there. It's not a little part, it's a big part, but it's little to us because we don't see it, which completely invalidates the whole process. But we're happy not to see this. We don't really want to see this. So what thought does is that it creates a loop made out of itself. And then when we get caught in the loop, we fail to see, we're incapable of seeing that the loop is only a loop and that it isn't reality. So if we wanted to say something about reality, not in a logical, thought-based way, but if we wanted to say something about reality, we could say that thought isn't a loop, it's open. And because it's not a loop, because it's open, it isn't tautological, it isn't redundant. And that sounds like a logical thing to say, but we're not actually saying what reality is, we're just saying what it isn't. Reality isn't a thought, it's not a loop of logic. That doesn't tell us anything about what it is, but it's still important for us to know, because we can differentiate from thought, between reality and thought. That's important because we don't make that differentiation. The whole point is that we don't make that differentiation. That's what creates all of our problems. We fail to distinguish from the thought loop, which is closed and redundant and tautological, to reality itself, which is totally open and doesn't loop back on itself endlessly over and over again. Thought doesn't do that, but reality doesn't do that, because reality isn't making assertions about anything. Reality isn't making any claims. It's not sticking its neck out, it just is what it is, and it's happy to be what it is. It doesn't have to go around mouthing off, making positive statements. What the hell would it want to do that for? If we do that, if I run around making positive assertions, coming out with opinions the whole time, saying this is this and that is that, as human beings do, and it's as dogmatic, masculine consciousness does in a way, or That is the default for being a male, is that we are inclined to make dogmatic statements about things, say this is this, this is that. And that's a power thing. Whoever can define reality has power. How much more power can you have than being the one who defines reality? That's absolute power. That's the power of the demiurge. It's not legitimate power, but it works as power. I'm not saying that women can't ever say what things are. Women can be like men and men can be like women. It's not either or. But on the whole, it's fair to say that men get off on dogmatic certainties. If we look at male-type religions, what else is a male-type religion apart from a whole load of dogmatic assertions that we're not allowed to question in case we annoy the Father God? And then when we annoy him, we're in serious trouble because you don't want to annoy the Father God. So that's what drives the whole thing about positive assertions, whether it's the Father God we're talking about, the demiurge, or thought. Thought doesn't question how it got to come up with its assertions, and the Father God doesn't want us to question the assertions that he makes. Questioning is a no-no, and that's how we end up getting to believe in a positive reality, a reality that is capable of being dogmatically described. But that is a cheat, as I keep on saying. So it's possible to say that there isn't just the one world, but there's two, in a manner of speaking. There's the world that we commonly live in, which is made up of our thoughts. That's the thought-created world, which overlays the world as it is and substitutes itself for it. And we don't realize because we don't differentiate between thought and reality, as I was saying earlier. So that's one world. But there is another world, which is the world of how things are before we go to the extent of describing it or thinking about it or analyzing it. What reality is before we nail it down. So there's reality when we have nailed it down with our thoughts, which is the mind-created virtual reality, the world we live in every day. And there's reality as it is before we nail it down. So we're very, very quick at nailing it down. We have our hammer out and our nails and bang, we've nailed it all down in a flash. Every time we think, every time we say anything, we've already nailed everything down so quickly. Even before we get started with whatever it is we're going to think or whatever it is we're going to say, we've already nailed the damn thing down. So we don't actually believe that there is any sort of reality that isn't nailed down, is what I'm trying to say. We've never seen it. If we did see it, we didn't like seeing it, and we probably imagine it to be some kind of aberration, and we want to discount it and forget about it. We really don't want to know about reality when it's not nailed down by thought. And so if we do encounter it, we don't say, oh, here is reality as it is before I've wrapped it up with my thoughts and made it all safe, harmless, and sterile. We don't say that. We just discount it. If we can't discount it, then we endure it, and then we discount it afterwards in retrospect and say, I was just flipping out a bit there. Or something weird happened, but we won't go any further because weird stuff isn't good. Weird stuff isn't good. Steer over there, away from the weird stuff. Not very heroic of us, but there you go. That is how we are. That's how behave. It's a fundamental attribute of what it means to be a human being. We steer away from the truth. The truth being synonymous with reality, and reality being that which is the prior situation to how things are after we think about it or pontificate about it. So there's these two worlds, one which is very familiar to us, so familiar that we think it's the only world, and the other world which is entirely unfamiliar, so unfamiliar that we don't acknowledge it in any way generally. And if we do acknowledge it, actually by our acknowledgement we just nail it down and become dogmatic about that instead. So we've cheated ourselves there as well. So the key to everything is this basic kind of model of saying that there's these two worlds. The world where we believe what we think, which is everyday, our everyday existence, can be thought of as the unconscious mode. We could also say that it's a kind of an unhealthy mode, possibly, but only in the sense that it's pain creating. So the thought created world, the loop logic world, the world which feeds off itself but has no actual relationship to reality, is a pain creating world, and we can either ignore the pain and keep on trying to fix it in a short-sighted kind of a way, or if we get really fed up with this game of continually trying to dodge the pain that is inherent in our way of life but never being able to, but we are nevertheless able to motivate ourselves to keep on striving to dodge that pain because we won't admit that we can't get away from it. That's the Buddha's first noble truth, of course. We don't like to hear about that. And I think when Buddhism first got translated and transcribed and brought over into the Western world, that didn't go down well at all, that first noble truth. We're just not happy with that at all, but never mind. So rather than saying it's unhealthy, which we could do, we could just say that it's a situation that is pain producing, and the only way to survive in it is to keep on killing ourselves, that we can actually dodge that pain in any meaningful way, which we can't. So that's the type 1 world that we're so familiar with, and that we don't see for what it is at all. If we did see it for what it is, that would be a different matter. If we did see it for what it is, that would in itself would be sufficient to that would be a sufficient step to be pointing us in the direction of being interested in the world that isn't created by thought. So it would be that would be a healthy process, because it's taking us out of the pain-creating world that we don't acknowledge to be pain-creating, the frustrating or sterile world that we don't acknowledge to be frustrating or sterile, because we're too afraid to give up on it because it's cozy and familiar, and we don't want to go out there to the unknown, even though it's out there in the unknown that reality is to be found. And reality, because it's not tautological, is not frustration producing or pain producing. I mean, it can be painful, but it's not inherent in reality itself. Because the pain that we do experience in everyday life, the psychological pain that we experience, is due to unrecognized or unacknowledged redundancy. So if we do recognize or acknowledge redundancy, that's a painful moment, but it quickly passes, because once we've recognized it, we let it go. There's no point in hanging on to a redundancy. There's nothing to hang on to, even though we thought there was. Or, which is what we almost always do, We refuse to acknowledge the redundancy, and then we have this situation of being stuck in a painful type of pseudo-reality, which we're always motivated to try to escape from, but which we never can, and which we don't see for what it is, and where we don't see our activities for being what they are. And that comes down to what James Carse calls the contradictoriness of finite play. We don't see it as contradictory because we can't carry on playing if we see that. We can only play when we don't see the self-contradiction. So it could be said that there is there is a passage or gate between the thought-created world, the pseudo-reality, and reality itself. So everything is about this gate, really, or situations that will serve as a gate, a place where we can go from the one world to the other. And that's where, we could say that's where the mental health is to be found, if we talk about it in terms of mental health. The growth, that's where our growth is to be found. That's where our life becomes meaningful rather than just an ongoing exercise in self-deception, which isn't meaningful. It's meaningful in the sense that the meaning of it is that we deceive ourselves. That's true, that's meaningful, but we don't allow ourselves to see that we're deceiving ourselves, and so we're living a false reality, which is the false reality we see when we don't allow ourselves to see that we're deceiving ourselves, which isn't a real reality. It's just a game we're playing. But the gate, and this is where things get difficult, because the gate isn't made up of logical, it isn't paved with logic. So the pathway between the thought-created world and reality is not paved with logic. There's no logical way to get from the one to the other. And another way of putting that is to say that there is a discontinuity. And there's always a discontinuity when it's reality we're talking about. We live in terms of continuities. Continuities means procedures and methods and ways to get what we can already see, or what it is that we're trying to see or get. Goal-orientatedness is the continuity. The operation of thought is a continuity. The operation of logic is a continuity. In other words, the operation of thought, the operation of logic is not real, because there's no continuity in reality. To get into reality, there's this thing we have to jump over, which is the discontinuity. But the funny thing about that is that we're not really jumping over it. I'm not really jumping over that that partition or that gate, because it's a discontinuity. So when I do jump over it, on the other side, it's not me that's jumped, because that's the discontinuity. If I was still there afterwards, walking around saying, hey, look at me, I've just jumped over the discontinuity and now I'm in a different realm, that's straight away I'm talking bullshit, because it's still me, still the same viewpoint. So that is not a discontinuity. So when we jump over the edge like that, not only does the world change, but also so does who I take myself to be. So that's a very big jump, and because it's such a big jump, that's why we're kind of iffy about it. There's not many guarantees there, obviously. I mean, I used to say, what happens? And if we listen to thought, whatever happens, it's not good, because unless thought can sanctify it, unless thought can rubber stamp it and say, yep, this is good, we don't trust it. and yet thought isn't real. So that's our predicament in a nutshell. So then there is a process, not a logical process, not an intentional or purposeful, or in any way thought moderated process by which we pass through this gate from the world that is constructed of our thoughts to the world that is actually there before we started thinking about it. And so it's not an exaggeration to say that the whole of life is about this, making this transition. If we're not making this transition, then we're not alive. We're living in a simulation of life, we could say. We're not alive because life isn't the same thing as a simulation. In a simulation, everything is controlled, everything is regulated, everything is decided from the outset, and we can never escape from what has been decided from the outset. Whatever else we might want to call that, it doesn't seem right to call that life, because life has life in it. That, what I've just described, has no life in it. It's just a repetition, which we don't see to be a repetition. It's a cheat. So the thing about the cheat is it's easy, and any gobshite can do it, and it costs nothing. It's as easy as falling off a log or taking a crap. It's as easy as that, and yet it doesn't mean a damn thing. So then we have this other thing, which is not easy. Which is, we could call it life, or we could call it reality, or whatever the hell we want to call it. Doesn't really matter, because when we call something something, we're just naming it. We're just wrapping it up with thoughts. So it doesn't really matter what we call it. But it's interesting. This is what's truly interesting. And life does, the everyday experience of life, no matter how heavily wrapped up we are in our thoughts, still contrives to bring about situations that can actually cause us to grow and leave behind a tautological world which is easy but not true, or not real, or which is easy but is not really solving anything because it only seems to solve something. Okay, thanks for watching.